Do you think you would want to live forever? Vampire stories, or at least modern ones, make it seem really glamorous, right? You're going to be at the prime of your life, and hopefully you're going to be wealthy and attractive, because if you're a vampire and you're living forever, you got to have money. If you have to figure that out at some point, right? So you've got eternity to be at your best, to be in your prime. You can explore any place you want to, try anything that you've always wanted to try. You can do anything. I recently read The Vampire Hunter by Stephen Graham Jones, and it gave me a lot of new things to think about in terms of both immortality and also just the entire idea of a vampire and what a vampire is. So, first off, yes, it's a vampire novel. And we have, just to give you a brief background on it, the main characters are Goodstab, the vampire, and then we have Arthur Bocarn, who is a pastor, and their story is told in 1912 through journal entries. It ties into modern times because we have the ancestor of Arthur Bocarn who received the journal. It had been discovered, found inside the walls of, an old church. And so she's going through and she's reading this journal entry. Now we have just really great character development. First of all, I'm going to say if you love characters, these characters are great. You get introduced to some amazing characters through this story. So basically we have Goodstab, who is talking to the pastor, and he's sort of confessing his story or just telling his story and talking about some of the things he has witnessed and experienced and been through. So one way that this is it's just fantastic because we don't have to tell the story of the past through flashbacks because we have a vampire character. He lived it. He is bearing witness to what he has seen. And he's talking through the genocide of his culture. And that really made me start thinking about what would that really be like to be immortal. And I think one of the first things people think about is everybody would grow old and die, right? But even beyond that, like the world as you know it would change so much that it wouldn't even be the same world. It's the idea of watching the world change. And at what point is that change too much? That's what this story made me think about. What if you experienced a cultural genocide? Not only does everyone grow old and die, but they're killed, they're murdered, they're just decimated. If you think about that and you have to witness that and you have to live with that. We also have the loneliness of what it must be like to be this person, but then also he's lost his entire culture. It really gives a lot of different things to think about in this novel. So we're following through on this story. We've got the journal told through the point of view of the pastor, and he's sharing all these thoughts, and like some of the language that he uses to describe Goodstab, it's almost maddening because he's describing this man as somewhat naive and childlike in ways, and it's just you're seeing the thoughts of just this perspective it's just crazy to read this, but it's meant to be told from the time period. Now, if I want to talk about the writing itself is really interesting. So if you think about language is so nuanced, right? You can be in the United States and language is very different in different parts of the country. So you have regional differences, but then you also have cultural differences within the regions. So honestly, reading this story, it had a little bit of a learning curve to it just because of the sentence structure and the language. And I really attribute that a bit to the Indigenous voice. I don't read a lot of that. I have not been exposed to a lot of that. And that's one of the things I really love, is hearing a story told from a different perspective, from a different voice. So that's really interesting to me. But then also we have a little bit of vocabulary to learn because we're using the descriptive language that the Indigenous language had. Now, of course, it's in English, but we're describing, for example, like big mouths or wags its tails. You know, these are the names for the animals. So you've got to kind of figure out what we're talking about here. We're using the language that Good Stab would have used back in his day. So it's really interesting to read it that way. Another thing I really like about this book is just the vampire story itself. I have always wondered why we have the idea of vampires having to drink human blood. I mean, I get it. We're telling horror stories and we have to have the vampire be scary, right? It's not going to be scary if we have vampires off in the woods eating bears and deers. Nobody's going to care. So I get that. But I never could have like the true suspension of disbelief because I needed a reason why it had to be human blood. And Stephen Graham Jones delivered. He gave a really good explanation, and I even think that goes into all kinds of things that we could say about, you know, who we are, our identity, what changes us. Are we the same person throughout our lives? Do we change? It's good. Honestly, it's just good. If you've read it, I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you've read other Stephen Graham Jones books and you have recommendations for me, or really any book that you would recommend to me, just leave it in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to Toe Beans and Tales for more book stories, vet tech stories, animal stories, and you know, we're just going to see where we go with this. Thank you for watching today, and I'll see you next time.